It is August the 3rd. It's good to be with you on Read Through the Word as always, and it's really, really fun. It's one of my favorite things. You probably know one of my favorite things is to learn a new word. And that's what we're going to do today. It's a new word to me, I confess. I'm not a wordsmith, and so some of you may be aware of this word, but it's new to me, and hopefully it'll be new to some of you, but the application of it is so good. We're talking about the inhabitants of Moab today. Take a look at, we're actually in all of Jeremiah 48 is the prophecy spoken to or over the land of Moab from the prophet Jeremiah. Now I want us to go back a little bit and refresh our memory of how the conception of the Moabites. If you remember, back in Genesis 19, in fact, let me see if I can get there really fast. It's back in January. My goodness, that was a long time ago, right? Back on January 6th. So if you aren't familiar with this part of our reading, maybe you joined in later than January and you're planning to just continue after December and finish it up in January or a later month, mark January 6th. And it's, chapter 19, 30 through 38 talks about the conception of the nation of Moab. And it was pretty racy, actually. As a result, this is Lot and his daughters. Before I catch you up there, Lot was the nephew of Abram. Abram left his country to go to a place where he did not know. Lot went with him. It was his brother's son. They agreed to divide the land. Lot took a land that looked pleasing to his eyes, and he took residence up in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah. They eventually Sodom and Gomorrah was eventually destroyed because of their sins. Abraham pleaded for God to spare his nephew. They did, and all that was left of Sodom and Gomorrah were Lot and his daughters. Well, they were in fear of not being able to have an ancestral line because they were girls. So they were with Lot. I'm just going to leave it at that. Y'all go over to January 6th, Genesis 19th, and look at the details of the story. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she called him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation known as the Moabites. So that's how we have the Moabite nation. That's not a pretty beginning at all, but that's how the nation was conceived. And then you had this kind of love-hate relationship between Moab and God's people. It's evidenced in Isaiah chapter 15 and 16. You can read that. Amos chapter 2, 1 through 3. Zephaniah also talks about Moab and the disgruntled time between Israel and Moab, or God's people and Moab. Ezekiel also talks about it. You also can remember maybe back in Judges when, in Numbers, it's also mentioned in Judges, but back in Numbers when we had the talking donkey situation with Balak and Balaam. Balak was the king of Moab. So there's so much history between these two nations. And God is pointing it out at this point. Look at and bringing judgment on them. But if you'll notice also, before I just even get started in the lesson, in verse 47 of, chapter 48, he says at the very end, "But I'll restore the fortunes of Moab in the days to come. I, the Lord, have spoken." So I love that when God brings, not always, but when God brings judgment, discipline, there is often, depending on the heart of the people or the person, there is restoration. And there must have been some type of restoration at this point, or at some point, because God did promise to restore, and maybe he knew that. All right, so let's look at 48, chapter 48, verse 11. From his earliest history, Moab has lived in peace, never going into exile. So, if they lived in peace, then why would judgment be brought against them? Were you asking that question? I was wondering that same thing. Is, well, if they've been a peaceful nation, but they really haven't, because I gave evidence of that from Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. They also had run-ins in Numbers with him. So it wasn't complete peace. They had overall peace, I guess you would say. Never going into exile. Maybe that's how that's defined. If you don't go into exile, you're at peace. He is like the wine that has been allowed to settle. He has been poured from flask to flask, and he is now fragrant and smooth. The time is coming, says the Lord, when I will send men to pour him from his jar. They will pour him out, then shatter the jar. At last, Moab will be ashamed of his idol Shamash, and as the people of Israel were ashamed of the golden calf at Bethel. Okay, so we know about, hopefully can remember about golden calf. I think it was Exodus 32 or something along in there. But I'll confess, I do not know a lot about wine that sits around. I'm not a wine connoisseur. But when I started studying this, I learned my new word, dredge. Look at, I believe I put this in your notes, the New American Standard Bible translation of our word dregs. Dregs are what you put in your hair. Dregs. Sorry about that. Moab has been at ease since his youth. In other words, things came easy. Let me just pause, put a little paper clip there for just a second. This is why we encourage you, as we teach, we encourage you to look at other translations. Because I wouldn't have pulled this out of this message, or I wouldn't, the Holy Spirit would not have pulled this out of this message had I not gone and dug a little deeper. So, I just encourage you to have Bible Gateway on your phone or on your iPad, on your computer, whatever, and be able to just go straight to it and type in this verse and pull up different translations of it. Or you can use Bible Hub. There's plenty other apps out there. So this is the New American Standard. Moab has been at ease since his youth. He has also been peaceful. Like wine on its dregs, it has not been poured from vessel to vessel, nor has it gone into exile. Therefore, it retains its flavor, and its aroma has not changed. All right, so what are dregs? Well, this explains it a whole lot better to me. A dreg, or dregs, are solid particles that tend to settle at the bottom of some liquids, such as wine or coffee. Okay, so I'm not a coffee drinker either. Yeah, I drink Dr. Pepper and water pretty much. And I do like my V8s. But I'm pretty much, that's my palate. That's what I drink. And I'm very limited on the caffeine and the Dr. Pepper. So I like to throw that in there because I know a lot of soft drinks are good for you. So just throwing out that out there for all those of you who are conscious about eating and drinking well. And I'm getting sidetracked. So let me get back to dregs. Solid particles that tend to settle at the bottom of some liquid such as wine or coffee. Have you ever had coffee? You made coffee and you got the last cup out of the pot and there were coffee grounds in it. Okay, that's how it's described as, that's the picture that this is painting. There's still that aroma of coffee, but I know all of you that are coffee drinkers are going, yeah, you don't want any of that. You don't want any part of the dregs because that's nasty. Right? Okay, so that's the picture that God is painting of Moab. You get to the point where things are so peaceful and maybe at ease or easy that you are almost proud of yourself. You are living in a place of utopia maybe in your own mind. And you're not going to do anything to stir things up. You're just going to just go with the status quo. That's exactly what was going on here with Moab. In fact, one of the commentaries said Moab had not been shaken up in a while and had settled into a comfortable complacency. Went on to say, many people today would benefit from being emptied from vessel to vessel. For them, for Moab, it was not going into captivity. But sometimes we have to be shaken up and emptied out. Or we are going to become like Moab and experience and have dregs in our life. Dregs, he specifically addressed 3 dregs. Self-sufficiency. I don't need God. I can do everything on my own. As believers, we can say, okay, it would be kind of like this. We've got our salvation, but I really don't need anything else from him. I've got what I need. I'm good. Complacency. You're just satisfied with the status quo of your relationship with the Lord, your relationship with other people. You don't really need to change anything. You're just, I'm good. Again, I'm good. I got this. Then the danger of exalting yourself above God. I'm so good at everything that's going on and taking care of myself that I don't need God, and I've arrived. I've got all of this, and God who? Instead of saying and being grateful for what God does, they were exalting themselves above God. That's the danger of dregs. Of that stuff that's left down at the bottom of the coffee. Those little particles. They still have this aroma, but they're not good. So we want to avoid the dregs. And we can do that by doing the exact opposite of what Moab did. I love when you can just easily look at the Bible and see what they did. So what do? The exact opposite. How did they fall out of favor from God? How did they fall out from the protection and presence of God? Do the exact opposite. And that's what we would do here. The remedy for dregs. We've got the cause, but the remedy is dependence on God. God, I need you for everything. Humility before God. I am coming to you on my hands and knees. I'm coming to you begging for help. Help me grow. Teach me more and more. An exaltation of God, lifting him up and praising him for who he is, but also what he does. Sometimes God has to shake us up and empty us out to make room for the new that he wants to pour in. So check yourself for dregs today. I had some for sure. See you next time on Read Through the Word.